Hi everyone, it's Christy from Green Eyed Tarot. It has been quite a while since I have been on to share a new video, so I'm really excited to be back. So this video is an idea that's been percolating in my mind for a long time, and I made a bunch of notes about it, and I just am now getting a chance to sit down and film this video. So this is a new tag that I am introducing. I don't think anything has been done around this before. I tried to do some research. I always try to research and see if it's like a tag that I might be recycling and not even know it. So I can give credit to the people who originally came up with the idea for the tag. I didn't see anything like in particular directly related to this. But the tag is tarot for the senses. And so the reason this came up is because actually in my job, in my regular full-time job, I work in the field of early childhood education, specifically do a lot of work in professional development for early childhood educators around infant and toddler development, and as well as up through age 5, and in particular focusing in on social and emotional development, emotional literacy, emotional competency, attachment, self-regulation, things that we tend to focus on when we think of mental health for young children, in that birth through age 5. And so I was facilitating like a professional development session on, we were talking about sensory experiences, and we started talking about the fact that there are way more than 5 senses, right? That there's more than the 5 classic senses that we know. And some of the people that were in the session with me were just sort of blown away by this additional information about different senses and how children take in all of this sensory information, and they take it in through way more than just those 5, classic senses that we learned about, I feel like, in school. Scientists actually have sort of theorized that there can be as many as 22 to 33 different senses that humans experience, right? That humans have as many as 20 something senses or sensory systems within their body. I'm not going to talk about 20 senses, don't know about that, but I am going to talk about 8 different sensory systems, and I thought it would be neat. So it got me thinking, of course. I always sort of connect tarot. I don't know if anyone else does this, but I always feel like anytime I'm like studying a subject or learning about a subject or even teaching about a subject and bringing the information to other people, I always start in my mind to make connections to tarot. It's like always in the back of my mind. So I started thinking about, okay, so tarot for the senses, how can I use my 9 senses to engage with tarot? And how do I do that? And what decks would sort of match up with those different sensory systems and how I experience tarot sort of with all of my senses. So I thought it would be fun to just think about that, to sit down and be like, okay, well, how do I experience, what decks help me experience my visual, right? The sight, the visual sense, and which decks are tactile for me, really have me experience a really tactile, a tactile experience while I'm using the tarot. So hope that makes sense. But so I have 9 prompts, and I will explain what each one of them are. And I have to kind of look at my notes. But I have 9 prompts for 9 different sensory systems. And then I also have sort of a way that you can bring in 2 decks, whether we're sensory seeking within those sensory systems or sensory avoiding. Because what we know, especially about me speaking in the context of young children, we know that their senses get overstimulated because they're taking in so much sensory information, and their sensory systems are not as developed as they are when they reach adulthood. And so some children are very sensory seeking with certain sensory systems. Some children are very sensory avoidant with certain. They'll get overstimulated when that sensory system gets overloaded. And that can be the same for adults. It happens to me. I get very auditorily overstimulated. So that means if someone's talking to me and there's a lot of loud music playing in the background and there's lots of other noises, I tend to get I'll get anxious. I can't focus. And so I can be like auditorily stimulated even as an adult. I get overstimulated with my auditory sense. So I thought, okay, well, let's think about maybe tarot decks that cause a sensory, like you avoid them because of a certain sense that it's activating. So we'll think about this in the sensory seeking, sensory avoiding way of looking at things, and also how these decks sort of align with these 9 sensory systems. So the prompts are like this. So we'll start with our 5 classic. We have sight, right, which is our visual sense. A deck that is visually stimulating, or a deck that overstimulates you due to too much in the cards, or for some reason you just get visually overstimulated when using it. So maybe you only use that deck at certain times, or maybe you only pull that deck out, certain times of year, or maybe you can only take that deck in small doses because it visually overstimulates you. Sound, which is our auditory sense, a deck that provides an ASMR-like experience. Basically sounds pleasing, right, when shuffled or when used. So has that sort of ASMR type experience. Smell, that's our olfactory sense, a deck that evokes a certain scent or reminds you of a memorable smell, or, and this is my favorite, for us deck sniffers out there, a deck that just smells good. Like, I don't know about all of you, but I always sniff my decks. I am a deck sniffer. I am proud of it. It's nothing to be ashamed of, but for all you deck sniffers out there, the olfactory prompt could be a deck that just smells good. Touch, so number 4 is our tactile sense. A deck that provides an amazing tactile experience, one that feels satisfying to use. Also, you could bring in a deck that is a sensory avoiding in this area, which means that you really just don't like the way it feels. I know a lot of people have opinions about cardstock and different cardstocks, and I always kind of talk about how I like different cardstocks because it gives me a different tactile experience when I use them. But there's also sometimes decks that are just tactilely, they just do not jive with me. So that's for the touch prompt. Taste, okay, this is a weird one because I don't know that anyone's tasting their tarot decks. If you are, that's okay. There's no judgment here. We listen and we don't judge here. So that's our gustatory or gustatory sense, a deck that evokes a certain taste, maybe a deck featuring food or that makes you crave certain meals, or maybe like that stirs up a memory about certain meals. And then we move on to the 6th sense, which is our vestibular system. So the vestibular system is sort of it's in our inner ear. It kind of lives in our inner ear, way in our inner ear, and it's our sense of balance. So a deck that helps to make you feel balanced, I guess like a deck, that helps you kind of feel more balanced when you use it. Maybe you reach for that deck to help you kind of just feel more in balance when you're sort of feeling off kilter. And then we have our proprioception sense. So proprioception is more like how our bodies move in space, like how we take up space. It's spatial relations. It's how our body moves. So maybe a deck that has a lot of movement in it, or that feels like movement, or has an interesting perspective that sort of makes us feel. Some decks make us feel off kilter. There's this sort of there's this idea in early childhood education that children need to experience disequilibrium because it helps them understand their proprioception, their vestibular and proprioception. So disequilibrium is good for young children, them being sort of feeling off balance, or like going up and down ramps, right? Or climbing, or looking at things from different perspectives. So proprioception could even be something like a deck that sort of makes you shift your perspective in a way. So that's proprioception. And then the last sense is interoception. So interoception, our interoception sense is basically is how we feel in our body. It's like things like our body temperature. It's hunger. It's tiredness. When we feel tired, it's fatigue. It's our sleep cycles, our circadian rhythms. It's listening to, being able to listen to our bodies. And so that's interoception. So a deck that makes you feel grounded in your body, that helps you perceive your own body in a certain way. Maybe a deck that contains lots of body positive imagery, maybe could fall into this interoception, makes you feel comfortable in your body, or just grounded, makes you feel really in touch with the sensations that are going on in your body, because that's really what interoception is about. So that's it. Those are all the prompts. And then the ninth, it's not a system, but the ninth prompt is sort of a bonus, as a deck that sort of maybe ticks all of these boxes or really sort of engages all of your senses. So I have a bonus deck for a deck that almost meets all of these sort of sensory experiences. So a bonus is kind of one that ticks all the boxes. So that's 9 prompts, 8 different sensory systems. I'm going to try to not make this long, but let's get into it, because let's be honest, this is probably going to take me a while. And I'm going to have to keep referring back to my own prompts that I created, just because there's so many of them. So let's get into this tarot for the senses. So sight, visual, a deck that's visually stimulating, and that just is sort of engaging that visual sensory, your visual senses, your sense of sight. For me, and this could be like weird, I don't know how to explain this. I'll try my best, but for me, it's the Zodiac Tarot. So this is a mass market deck, and it's hard to explain. There's a couple of decks that probably could have fallen in that are similar to this, but I have so many decks that are visually appealing. I mean, let's be honest, we purchase decks because we like the way they look as part of the reason we get them, because we enjoy the way they look, and looking at them and looking at the images on the card, brings a visual experience, if you will. So I have a lot of decks that could have fallen into this. I feel like a lot of people are going to think, yeah, I have so many decks. But for me, this deck, there's something about the way the artwork on this deck, it's like a cross between, it's like cartoon, but not really too cartoon. It's illustrated, but illustrated in a way that's like sort of simplistic, but also contains lots of, this is an RWS clone, so, but it contains a lot of elements in it that helps me make visual connections. I like that it has the symbol for the different elements. It's the Zodiac Tarot, so there are definitely going to be astrological associations on the cards, which is helpful too. So for anyone who's trying to study, those two things, put astrology and tarot together, it's a great deck for that. But I don't know, I think it's the dark backgrounds and the colors, it makes it pop. You know how on your phone and different devices, they have the dark mode now, right? You can have it automatically switch to dark mode when it gets dark out, or when the lighting is lower. And to me, I have that set because to me, all of a sudden, it just makes it more visually appealing, and it's easier on the eyes somehow. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but something about this dark mode in this Zodiac Tarot, it makes it really visually appealing for me, because all of the color, I guess too, because there's lots of color in it, and the colors are sort of popping because of that dark, because of this dark, almost like nighttime, right? The night sky, the intuitive night goddess, right, has that same feel. It's just sort of that nighttime background, but there's so much lushness and there's so much going on in the cards with all the flowers and the blooms and things like that. So I think that's why this is one of those decks that I find myself reaching for over other decks, because of the way it's illustrated and just the visual appeal of it, the way they're laid out. Like I said, I love the illustrations because they're not 100% childlike, like fairy tale, storybook necessarily. And it just feels accessible in a way. It's visually accessible. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not making any sense. But anyway, that's the Zodiac Tarot. And to me, this is just one of those decks that's, it just immediately came to mind when I was thinking visually and things that, decks that are really visually pleasing for me and sort of have a nice calming effect as well, a nice visually calming effect. So on the other side of that, that's sort of sensory avoiding. And we could think of decks that might be too busy, have too much going on. But also for me, and this may be another one, the John Bower Tarot. So I love this deck. I love the artwork. I love John Bower's artwork. It's so Grimm's fairy tale. It's really lovely. I love it. The backs are like visually on my eyes for some reason, no, it just does not work. So immediately the backs of this deck are like, they're assaulting my eyes. It's assaulting my eyes for some reason. And the other thing with this deck, and again, like sometimes we might think of a visually overstimulating deck as having too much in the cards, but this to me, the reason is the cards are on the smaller side. There are these giant borders. It sort of smushes everything right into the middle of the card, which wouldn't be so bad if the artwork wasn't it's so zoomed out and there's so much detail that I can't see. Like I have to hold this deck literally up close to my face if I want to see like small details. You know what I mean? Like this, I can see it's like a little, is it a gnome? I have to be like holding it up to my eyes. And again, this is nothing against the deck. This is probably just my eyesight. It's horrible. I have horrible eyesight as I'm getting older. It's not getting any better. I need reading glasses a lot of times to see details like that up close. But I don't know if I'm making sense, but this deck visually, it strains my eyes. So I get overstimulated because I'm like trying to see the details. Some of the images are really dark, right? Like there's just, it's very hard for me. And I think it's because my nearsighted, like I need reading glasses pretty much all the time for reading, for anything, like I said, that's up close. So like a deck like this, just my eyes are so strained looking at this. I need like all lights on, like it needs to be like floodlight on it so that I can actually see details. It's just not, it's very visually draining for me, if that makes sense. So this is just the deck that came to mind when I was thinking of like being visually overstimulated because I feel drained when I'm trying to like look at the details on the card. And because I'm such a narrative tarot reader, is that a thing? I use the imagery, right, so much. I like those really narrative scenes, very illustrated scenes in my tarot decks. And when I'm straining to see like every detail, it's very visually overstimulating for me. So that's visual. So second one is the sound, the auditory one, the deck that provides an ASMR-like experience. It sounds so pleasing when you're using it. And that's, for me, I could have a lot of decks. I mean, there's quite a few decks but I immediately thought of this Super Lunaris tarot. This was a Kickstarter. This is, I believe, the first edition. I think there were other editions of this. So this is the Super Lunaris. And the reason this one immediately came to mind is because I remember when I got this deck, like I literally couldn't stop shuffling it because of the sound it makes. Because of this sort of, I think everyone knows, the swishy sound. I'm going to be quiet for a minute. Sort of, it's so satisfying. And for some of you, you may be like turning your volume all the way down right now because that might not be satisfying for you. And I get that. This is, a very personal thing. But I remember getting this deck and it's got, this beautiful edging. It might have been the first true like matte. I don't know. It's the matte on this deck it's a different type of matte. I don't know what they call it. I'm definitely not like a cardstock person. If I can find it, I will link. Like there's Lisa Pepez did a video on like cardstock, just on cardstock, and so she probably has more of she definitely is like more of an expert, and she may have talked about like it's almost like a satin matte. I don't know how to describe it. Again, I'm very bad at like, I can tell between matte and linen and like glossy, but like this is just it's a different type of matte. And I feel like this was like the first deck I got that was like this cardstock. I probably should have paid attention to like what the cardstock specs were. So I would be better informed and better educated about this and not sound like I do right now talking about it. But the deck is beautiful. I think the deck is, beautiful in itself. I love this deck, but just the I don't know, the sound. And like, it's a matte deck, but it doesn't stick. But like I'm hoping like that's picking up. Because I tend to shuffle back and forth between my hands. Like I shuffle, and then I move them back and forth from one hand to another. And then I pick my cards. So like I do this back and forth. And so for me, like when it makes that sound, oh my God, I like that sound. So this is that ASMR type. Like I said, this might be literally driving you crazy right now. And I'm so sorry if you're someone who's like overstimulated or is sensory avoiding in this type of sounds, where sounds have, just sort of overload your senses in that way. But for me, this deck could fit like the tactile too, because like I said, the cardstock but it was definitely the first deck I had that sort of made that swishy. Again, very technical terms here, but I don't know what else to call it. Swishy. The very swishy sounds. So that's the Superlunaris. That is for auditory, our auditory sense. My auditory sense, it just delights me in that little ASMR experience. So smell. So now we have olfactory, the deck that evokes a certain scent or reminds you of a memorable smell, or a deck that just smells good. And so I have two. I've cheated on this one. So I have two in terms of olfactory. So this is the Tarot of Persephone's Garden. You could easily insert Tower of the Huntress in here. I'm definitely from Make Playing Cards. So this is Tarot of Persephone's Garden, and I'm pretty sure, were these Make Playing Cards? I'm trying to remember if I got these on. No, these came directly from the creator, but I think they might have been printed. I don't know. I probably should know this, but anyway, I'm sniffing the deck because it just smells good. It's linen cardstock, and I don't know what it is, but like the ink, it just smells good. So I am a deck sniffer, but this deck smells good. It's gorgeous. Can we just talk about, that for a second? Like that, it's absolutely stunning. It also, on top of it smelling good, this deck sort of evokes a certain memory in me. Like there's like, I don't know what it is, sort of like a museum type smell. Like, so the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which I've talked about a number of times, I probably should just stop talking about it because I'm obsessed. Being from New York, being so close to it, it's like one of my favorite places. So, but there's like a smell to the museum, especially specific wings of the museum. And this deck, for some reason, just evokes, like, there's like period furniture. There's like a whole like decorative arts. That's what I'm looking for. The words I'm looking for. Decorative arts like area. And there's like recreated rooms. And there's a room that looks exactly like this. Like this bed, with this like platform with like the curtains, like the heavy like velvet curtains hanging. And like that wing, that whole area, like it has this smell to it, and this deck sort of reminds me of that. So never mind that I like to sniff this deck because it smells good. It just smells like ink. So it probably wouldn't smell good to some people, but to me it smells good. If you're like a book sniffer, then I feel like you're automatically a deck sniffer. Your book sniffing was like your gateway drug to deck sniffing, I feel like. So I was a book sniffer, still am. So here we are. I'm just bearing my soul. So please, no judgment. But yeah, I feel like you just automatically move on to deck sniffing or sniffing other things. But books were my gateway drug for sniffing, and Tarot of Persephone's Garden smells good. But it also evokes a lovely memory. So I cheated. I have another deck that sort of evokes a smell. This is the Metanoia Marseille. This is a gorgeous can we just talk about the matte edges on this deck? This is a absolutely stunning deck. Look at the back. So the backs alone are enough to evoke that flowery smell, like flowers, like smell just specific flowers. So this deck is definitely, it is the Metanoia Marseille. It is gorgeous. Like the color palette, the card stock is like rose petal, but it doesn't like stick. I don't know how to describe it. It doesn't stick like some other rose petal, but this definitely evokes sort of the, that flowery, like when you step into a florist and like you're just sort of like bombarded with all of the scents of the different flowers. We just recently went to, it's an arboretum here, and they had the Camellia Festival, and it was like the greenhouses were filled with blooming camellias. It's like that this deck sort of evokes that scent. So I definitely wanted to throw it in here as a deck that evokes certain scents, and this is definitely the flower, like the flower. This is probably one of the most flowery decks that I have, because I don't often have decks that are like just flowers or anything like that. But this is, this is definitely one of the more like floral, but it evokes that smell. It brings back that smell of just flowers, like that very, very fragrant aroma, and what you smell, that fragrance, very fragrant type flowers. So that's the Metanoia Marseille. Next one is Touch. So this is Tactile, a deck that provides an amazing tactile experience, one that feels satisfying to use. Again, a lot of decks can fall into this, but I went with like my gut, like the first deck I thought of, and that was the Terra Volatile. This deck is linen cardstock. This might have been my first deck with linen cardstock, maybe. But this deck is just, the way that it fans, because I do shuffle back and forth and a lot, and I also lay out, like I'll fan. I like to, fan my cards. So that's like butter. That is like butter. It like just fans so beautifully. So like that experience, tactile experience, but then also the cards themselves, because they are linen. They're a linen, and it's hard to describe. They're like, you can kind of feel the texture on them. It's not like, it's subtle. It's not like, I have some decks that like you can really feel, like you're like, this is linen. Like you can feel it. This is super subtle. You can it almost feels like on the backs, like you feel more of the linen. I don't know if you can hear that. It's like, it's there, but it is very subtle. And this deck is it's just a dream to like, I don't know. The only thing I can say is the butter. It's just like a buttery linen. So this one would have good for like taste, for that gustatory sense, because it's like butter. It's just very buttery. So the cardstock is amazing. I love this deck. That's no secret. I've had this deck in many of videos, but man, is it a tactile dream. It's just so satisfying. Like I said, the way they are so smooth, it fans out so smooth. They just separate. There's like that, like I said, that little bit of a texture on it in your hands. It's just a dream. It shuffles so nice. It's just a bendy, like I said, it doesn't feel like it's going to bend. Like it snaps back, but it's just like so smooth. So that's the Tactile Touch. Okay, so on my sensory avoiding, like sensory seeking, Terra Volatile. Sensory avoiding, and I love this deck, so I hate to put it down here as one, but this is the Starseeker Tarot, and I love this deck. Don't get me wrong, I still use it. It's not like this prevents me from using it, but this is a rose petal finish. It's like a rose petal, like overload, like super duper rose petal. It's very, it does, like, I can say that it doesn't clump, which is great, but it can, sometimes this rose petal is like a little overwhelming for me. It feels like, sometimes it feels nice. Like sometimes I'm like, ooh, that's so nice. And other times I'm like, okay, no, it's, so that's me, and that's totally on me. Again, this is about my senses and my sensory experiences. And so sometimes it's like really satisfying to use. And sometimes, like I said, I'm just like, oh my God, and I can tell you that it doesn't clump as bad as some other decks that are rose petal, but it definitely doesn't, it's work. You have to really, in order to get it to not clump. I'm trying to think of a deck that is also rose petal that literally just clumps together all the time. This is definitely, again, that butter word. It's more buttery, you can fan it out. I don't know. So this is one of those that I have to be in the mood. And sometimes it provides an amazing tactile experience for me. And sometimes I'm no. Other times I'm just not in the mood. But again, I do love this deck. I love the Oracle, the Companion Oracle. It's beautiful color-wise, visually. This is could easily fall under different categories for me. Balancing, to me, this is a very it's a very airy deck, and it's very balancing. It's also feels grounded. So this could fall under a lot of categories for me. But again, for the tactile experience, it's one of those that's I have to be in the mood. And sometimes I do I do have an avoidance to it. And that's true for a lot of the rose petal decks. I have the Roots and Wings. Oh boy, that one is even more. And again, I love that deck. The Roots and Wings Oracle, that is some hardcore rose petal. Again, some people the rose petal is their jam, and I don't mind it if it's done this one is you can fan it out. When it is a super clumpy deck, I struggle. I definitely struggle using it. So next we're on to taste. Again, another a weird prompt, but the gustatory sense, a deck that evokes a certain taste, a deck featuring food, makes you crave certain meals. So I went with a deck that's more of evokes a certain meal. It makes me, it's a memory. Let's put it that way. So it's this ginormous deck that I can't even fit into the frame. And this is the Inner Child cards, a fairy tale tarot. Let's just talk about the ginormous book that's with this. This is a deck that I'm doing a deck study with. I'm literally gearing up for it. So it's in order. It is also the biggest deck I've ever seen in my entire life, but I kind of love that about it. Anyway, so Inner Child cards, a fairy tale tarot. These are the ginormous, you can see how big these cards are. But I feel like they're meant for study. I feel like they're great, altar cards. That's besides the point. Okay, so besides this deck being super colorful, to me, it's very visually satisfying because of the colors. It's also ginormous, so I can see it. Right? So let's just talk about my lack of my visual acuity being completely off. So the fact that it's ginormous, that works for me. But this is the taste sense. So the gustatory aspect of it is that this deck reminds me, and granted, they're the Inner Child cards, the fairy tale tarot. When I think fairy tale, I think this type of illustration, because this looks like the books that I used to check out of the library when I was a kid. This really reminds me of the books that I had as a kid, the fairy tale books I had. It was this type of illustration. This is what they look like. So when I took books out of the library, like I said, or read books as a kid, it looked like these. It was very much this type of style, coloring, the way these just the scenes, look at these look, Snow White, the dwarves, this is, look at the witch, this is the type of books I had, Mother Goose, and it was very much illustrated in this style. So this deck really, really takes me back to days when I was homesick. When I was homesick from school, and I would be all bundled up on the couch, under a blanket. I'd have all of these books. I used to do books on tape where I would have the books the book, and like one of my favorites was like we had an Alice in Wonderland book, and it was like several. It was like Alice in Wonderland. It was like several tapes and several books. And yes, that's how old I am. Books on cassette tape. And I would curl up with my little books on tape or just read my books, and my mom would make me chicken soup and saltine crackers, like 100%. Still, when I'm sick, I just want a sleeve of saltine crackers. And so this deck is like, I can taste the chicken soup, I can taste the saltine crackers, I can taste the ginger ale, which I hated, and my mom would make me drink anyway, because she was like, if that's going to make you all better, just drink the ginger ale and you'll be magically healed. And I hated it. But I can taste the ginger ale. It's like that little trifecta: chicken soup and like the Lipton chicken soup, like the one that was in the packet with like the little stringy noodle, like the long thin noodles, like the Lipton, like the sip of soup. Like, I swear, it was like that cup of soup. I can literally taste, that's the trifecta: the cup of soup, the saltine crackers, the ginger ale. I can taste it right now. So this deck, I was like, oh my gosh, this deck is like my sick day deck. And it just reminds me of those days when I was homesick, and I don't remember the sickness part of it. I just remember like the cozy, like reading my books, like my mom, giving me saltine crackers, checking on me, like in and out of, like being in and out of sleep, like sleeping and waking up, and like the tape still playing, like on my little book on tape. Like, so yeah. So this deck just evokes that 100%. And I love it because it's the inner child cards. And man, does it bring me back to, when I was a kid, and it's all like just positive. It's a positive, warm, fuzzy type feeling. But I can taste that. Like I said, I can taste that chicken soup when I have this. It just evokes that memory. So that's the taste, the gustatory sense. So now we're on vestibular, a deck that helps to make you feel balanced. So a deck that helps to make me feel balanced. So this is interesting. So I have a sensory seeking and a sensory avoiding for this in the same deck. And I will explain, because you're probably like, what are you talking about? How do you have one deck that's doing it for you and one deck that isn't? So this is the Gentle Tarot. For those that don't know this, I feel like if you don't know this deck, like, where have you been? But this is two different editions. So I have the Gentle Tarot, and I have the Gentle Tarot, so this is the linen version, and this is the like regular standard, I guess standard edition is what you would call it. So these are the same decks. Obviously there's some differences. These are bigger, and this is linen. So this deck makes me feel super balanced. It's the Gentle Tarot, so it kind of makes sense. But one of the things that I love about this deck in particular, this version of the deck, is it's a little bit smaller, right? A little wider. It fits like perfectly in my hand. It's a dream to shuffle, so easy to shuffle. So that in itself puts me in a balanced sort of space. I feel more balanced because of that. And then the other thing that I think this deck helps me do is the color coding on it. The fact that it's color coded. So you can see the majors have this purple. Here we have the Seven of Thunder. So those are like this yellow color. These are majors. We have the cups, right, which is water. So that's blue. Here's more thunders. And so one of the things that's amazing and sometimes is stress relieving to me, obviously you can reorder any deck. You can take any deck and reorder it and put it back into order, which I think is very relaxing. That's one of those things that's a kind of a stress reliever for me. But the other thing is the fact that you can put them you can categorize them by color. So you can take them and put them back with just based on the colors, without having to give much thought to it. You can just sort of recategorize them without having to like look at the images. You literally can just look at the colors. So almost like color therapy. Like, I feel like this deck helps me to feel more balanced because of the way that I can just easily take it and like recategorize based on the colors. So that's this deck it's the gentle tarot, right? It's super gentle. It's got such a it's nature, there's so much nature, and it's nature based. It's but it's balanced in that it has human experience, and it human figures in it. It's not just animals. There are humans in it, and that's why I can get behind it, because I struggle with like animal only decks, because I connect the tarot as being such a human experience. And so, but I can easily just separate the cards by color, and it's very relaxing, and it almost resets me and makes me feel more balanced. If that makes sense. So this is like just one of the easy ways that you don't have to, like I said, I don't have to be like looking at the cards. I could just literally like use the colors. And I love that about this deck, that I can do that. So that's the way that I get balanced. The fact that this deck is matte yes, it's matte, and it's also feels a little rose petally. I can't, it's very hard for me to like, it's not as easy as the linen. So this deck, to reorder it, it's like it's not as like smooth, that like just that repetitive, like putting them in piles, like see how fast I put that one in piles. Like this one, like they're like, I have to like make sure they're not stuck together. They're like sticking together. So it's nothing against the deck. It's the same deck. It's a gorgeous deck. It's just, I prefer the linen. Like this one sort of doesn't make me feel as balanced because of the experience I have with using it. So, but this deck again makes me feel so balanced. And another way that I sort of incorporate sort of this color therapy is by using the Color Mage Oracle with this. And obviously I'm not going to spend too much time on it, and I'm cheating because this is an Oracle deck, but I love to sort of just, not even the keywords, like just like look at like, okay, so like this is like more like this is in this orangey family. Oh, and this like lighthouse is in this sort of greenish family. And then I have mallow, which is like more like purple. And this one like, I feel like this one's sort of like, and so it's like a cool way to like just, again, like use the colors in this deck and put them into like color families, and then be like, this one could be like here and purple. Like, and so I don't know, this is just my way of it's relaxing. It's, to me, this makes me feel so balanced. The color therapy aspect of it, this sort of color exploration. I love using the Gentle Tarot with its different color coordination with this Color Mage Oracle. So that's just a little bit of a way that if you have both of these decks, it's a way that I use them to help me feel balanced. And sometimes it's just fun. And then to kind of go back and look at the keywords based on how you categorize them, and then how they relate to that suit. So that's just a little, like I said, a little kind of exercise that I use. But this Gentle Tarot Linen Edition is because of this. One of the reasons, many reasons, is because it's the Gentle Tarot, and it's amazing, and it helps you feel balanced, but also just that color coordination and being able to categorize. Categorizing like helps my brain reset, if that makes any sense. Like putting a deck back in order, like sometimes is just a reset for my brain, and it helps me to get back to a more balanced place. So I kind of immediately thought of this deck, the Gentle Tarot, when I was thinking of balance. So proprioception is, like I said, we said the movement or perspective, like our spatial relations. And one of the deck that I kind of like immediately thought of when I thought of like perspective and like, like perspective and just how we take up space. And this may not make any sense, but is this Fantasy Garden Tarot. And I'll kind of explain why in a minute. But this Fantasy Garden Tarot is actually, I find it amazing for a number of reasons, but one of them is that the artist created this using, I think it was eight colors, ballpoint pens in 8 colors. So the art was created, these are the backs, all using only 8 different ballpoint pen colors, which I think is fascinating in terms of art. So that's really cool about this deck. But the reason I picked this for this proprioception, this sort of like spatial, how I fit into space and perspective, different perspective, is because of like, so you can see how look at how large these swords are. Like I don't want to say like, I can admit when I first got this deck, and some of the, like, I was like, why are the cups like the size of the people? Why are they so huge? Like the perspective to me was off. But then I started thinking of it in terms of like just thinking about what that could add to the meaning of the tarot cards, the meaning of each card, and how like things can appear bigger than they are, like issues can be big, or maybe we're making more of it, like, we're making a mountain out of a molehill type of thing. And like, so I started thinking of it that way. But this deck is like, I think it's so cool, the perspective. Like a lot of the people are really small, like in these, and then like this, look at this, like the sword is like ginormous. And so perspective is interesting in this deck. Like some people may be like, the perspective is completely off, like, but I think it was done on purpose, and I may just be making that up. But like, okay, look at the giant, how giant the pentacles are, and so I don't know if that helps, like to just like be like, that's the 9 of pentacles, like, and it helps to like be able to see, or if it's just like this perspective, like that we're smaller than, like we're in this universe, right? And like how little we are, like we're sort of like so small in the universe, but the things that our human experience is so large and encompasses so much. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't know. So this is the deck I immediately thought of, like, look at like why the cups are giant. Look at the small people in the 10 of cups, the little small family, and then giant cups. I mean, so this deck just made me think of how I take up space. And like when I think of proprioception, like how my body physically in space, how my body takes up physical space, and the different perspective, like how perspective changes when I'm standing higher up, when I'm like, just that perspective shift of where my body is, like how my body, like the position my body's in, things like that, the positioning. So this deck just sort of immediately made me think of proprioception. Like it was the first one I thought of. I was like, wow, those giant cups and giant pentacles are really, it's an interesting perspective. So that's the Fantasy Garden Tarot. I think it's really cool. Okay, so then we have interoception, our last sense. Oh my gosh, okay, we're still under an hour. Our last sense, interoception, a deck that makes you feel grounded in your body, that helps you to perceive your body, that helps you get in touch with the sensations in your body, sort of like when you do like a meditation or when you do a grounding exercise, like where you breathe and like you breathe into like different parts of your body and things like that. So that's interoception. And so again, immediately, first deck to come to mind in grounding is the Magical Nature Tarot. I think I've mentioned this deck like 1,000 times on my channel. Every time I talk about grounding and needing grounding, I mention this deck. So this is the Magical Nature Tarot. It is very magical. It is very nature. It was literally created from nature. So the inks, the inks for the artwork was created by using natural materials. Even this cardstock is an eco herbage cardstock. So the cardstock itself has plants and herbs in it. It is amazing. I love this cardstock. It could go under my tactile experience. In fact, it almost did, but I was like, but I'm going to use it for this interoception. It's my grounding deck, but it could definitely go into the tactile experience. I love it. When I first got it, it still smells a little bit. It smelled like rosemary, like delicious. I would sniff it all the time. So also olfactory. It's faded. It's definitely faded, but when I first got it, oh my gosh, it smelled like rosemary. It just smelled so good. And so this deck it's so grounding, I think, because holding it in your hand, you're literally holding the earth, like things from the earth. So that helps it. I'm pretty sure that helps it to be a grounding deck, in my opinion. But it's very earthy. So that's why I always think of this as such a grounding deck. It's very gentle. It's just beautiful. And to know that, it was created with this sort of love of earth and with this sort of eco-conscious, mentality in mind is even more, I feel like it brings even more grounding. I love this death card. It's amazing. I've talked about that. Like I said, I've talked about this deck so much. Again, it's beautiful to hold. It's beautiful to have in your hands. It's sometimes just grounding to hold it. Like it feels so grounding and brings you back into your body. So whenever I feel like I'm untethered or like feel like I'm feeling disconnected and sort of like all over the place, this is the deck that I would immediately reach for. So this is the Magical Nature Tarot. Again, it's not a surprise. I've talked about it many times on my channel about how grounding it is and how I use it for that purpose. So I love this Three of Cups. It's so, and like the color palette is so calming and pleasing. And again, it's an amazing deck. If you have not checked this out, like definitely check it out. It is worth investing in. To me, it's just such a unique deck, and I love, like I said, I love the cardstock. I obviously don't have any other Echo Herbage decks like with this kind of cardstock, so it's in a class of its own. So in thinking about sensory seeking, sensory avoiding, so that's how when I want to feel grounded, when I want to feel sort of ungrounded, if that makes any sense, when I want to sort of feel escape, maybe like escape, that's a bad word, but like escape, have that sort of mystical, like liminal type of feeling. I have a lot of decks who fall into this, but I immediately, when I was thinking of like, I want to feel like mystical, I immediately thought of the Tarot of Mystical Moments. To me, this deck is like the closest I come to an Alice in Wonderland deck without it being an Alice in Wonderland deck, if that makes sense. To me, this deck feels like going down a rabbit hole. It feels like falling down a rabbit hole into like a different world, right? I mean, it's called Tarot of Mystical Moments. It's very mystical feeling. Like, so when I want to feel like I'm not in this world, when, like I said, I'm sort of in a liminal space, this deck to me feels very liminal. And again, like, it just like, to me, this is like, I've fallen down the rabbit hole. I'm now in like Wonderland, and like I round the bend and this is what I come upon. I'm like, what's happening here? Like, you're made out of flowers. Like, so this to me is, I don't think I have no Alice in Wonderland decks. I don't. It's nothing like, I think it's just like, I enjoyed it. There was like an Alice in Wonderland TV movie when I was a kid. It was like 1985. It was amazing. They were like, Sammy Davis Jr. was in it, and like Telly Savalas, like it was like filled with all these like stars from that time. Ringo Starr was in it, like, and I like was obsessed with it. But that's like the most I ever connected to Alice in Wonderland. And this to me, like I said, just feels like that. It feels like falling down the rabbit hole. So when I want to go the other way, when I want to feel untethered, when I want to feel like I'm in a liminal space, when I want to feel like I'm going, I want to kind of escape to another like reality, right? Another world. This is like definitely one of the decks I go to. This and Dreamkeeper's Tarot, to me are so similar and have that same energy. But Tarot of Mystical Moments, this to me is just, like I said, it's just quirky and weird, and it feels like stepping into a different world and meeting all these like interesting, creatures and people, and like engaging with them. And sometimes they're helpful and sometimes they're not. Like sometimes they're awful, but it's like all about the experience and this adventure. So that's Tarot of Mystical Moments for me, definitely. So it's sort of the opposite of the grounding. It's that tarot, that sensory avoidance, when I want to avoid feeling too grounded and too in my body and want to have a little bit of escape. My deck is Tarot of Mystical Moments. So those are all of the prompts, and I promised one bonus. And so I have a deck that sort of checks almost all of these boxes. So so the bonus is a deck that maybe meets almost all of these sensory, that gives you the full, complete sensory experience. And that for me is the Circle of Doors Tarot, another one that I've talked about, many times on my channel. But this deck is, it's like an interesting, it's almost a contradiction, this deck, in itself, like it contradicts itself. So the cards are a little bit larger. I can tell you visually, I think this deck is stunning. It has this gold, like foil, like stamping on it. I love the dark backgrounds, again, like sort of reminiscent of the Zodiac. There's a darkness to this, that to me is very visually appealing. Sound wise, oh my God, we got this cardstock again is another one that it just, it just swishes. Like and again, I don't even know how to describe this cardstock. It's like a satin. It's definitely matte, but it's also satin. It's not really glossy. Okay, I'll stop. For that might be driving people crazy. But sound, smell. Oh, it smells so good. Oh man, this deck has a really good smell too. Like the ink, something about the ink. So smell 100%. Touch, again, tactile. I mean, it feels luxurious. Something about this deck feels luxurious. Like the cardstock, the fact that it's a little bit bigger, the gold on it, it just feels luxurious. It feels like, I don't know, it just feels like being like indulging, like yourself, like being indulgent. Again, I don't taste my decks. Like again, no judgment if you do. So I don't know that this has really any kind of gustatory, so we're not checking that box. Vestibular makes me feel balanced. This deck at the same time makes me feel balanced and unbalanced. Again, it's a contradiction. It's all of the best, sort of challenging my senses in all the best ways, this deck for me. It challenges me on so many different levels. So it definitely checks the box of vestibular and proprioception, sort of like the perspective, because like if you look at this, it's like blurry. Like, so it's definitely like that disequilibrium I was talking about. This deck kicks you into disequilibrium, but in a good way. Like it's challenging you. This is challenging me to sort of like hone in on it because it's completely blurry. And you know, that just adds to the meaning. Again, here we have like images like superimposed. So perception wise, again, it checks those boxes. A deck that makes me feel grounded. This deck again is both grounding and liminal. It's such a contradiction, but it is 100% checking like almost all of my sensory boxes, if you will. So Tarot for the senses for me, this is the deck that just, it's ticking all those boxes. It is a sensory experience in itself. I think it has keywords. It is just an amazing deck. I think of this as a tool. I always think of tarot as a tool. This deck in particular it's such a tool in my spiritual practice. So that's the Circle of Doors Tarot. It's the bonus. It hits all of the boxes for me almost in terms of the sensory experience it provides. So giving me, engaging all 8 of my sensory systems at once is the Circle of Doors Tarot. So that's it. That's the tag. It was a long video, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope please, consider participating. I know it's probably going to take time and thought, and not everyone has that. Not everyone has the mental space and the headspace. I know I didn't, and that's why it took me so long to get back on here. But it was really rewarding to do this. I was excited about it. And so please consider, doing a VR and tag me in it. And because I would love to see how everyone sort of interprets this. So again, it's hashtag tarot for the senses. And like I said, I'd love to see what you come up with. And I had so much fun and I'm glad that, I took the time to devote to creating this, because I had a lot of fun. So thank you so much if you've tuned in, if you stuck around for this hour. I'm so sorry, but there's 8 senses, probably more sensory systems that we know of. And just a little side note, there actually is another sense. It's called chronoception, and it's the sense of how time passes. So that's another bonus if you wanted to do a deck that sort of takes you out of time or has something to do with timing. If it's a deck that you use to interpret timing in your readings or something like that, chronoception is the sense of how time passes. I'm pretty sure it's going to be limitless how many senses we actually have and humans actually experience, but that's the joy of like continuing to learn and research and learning more about this fascinating thing, which is the human body. And so thank you so much for joining me. If you haven't done so, please consider subscribing to my channel. I will be back more frequently, I hope. And so it was definitely good to be here, and I look forward to viewing all your video responses.